Ladies and gentlemen, this is The Good Doctors. Please welcome physicians Dr. Brooke Miller and Dr. Robert Malone, and your host, senior editor, Epoch Times, Yanya Kellick.
So, The Good Doctors. This is something that we at the Epoch Times have been thinking about a lot. What does it mean to be a good doctor? This has been a study of the last several years. And here on stage, we have two absolutely good doctors. We have Brooke Miller. Brooke Miller is a small country doctor from Virginia. And Brooke Miller decided very early in the pandemic to study early treatment options, buck the system, and built a huge business in the process of everyone wanting to go to him because they knew that's where they could get healthy. And he's also a cattle rancher, and that'll become relevant in a moment. And in the center here, we have, of course, Dr. Robert Malone.
They hate you, Robert.
Dr. Malone is a physician. He's also a scientist. Okay? He has some of the original patents in the mRNA technology that was used in these vaccines. And he also started sounding the alarm early. So let's discuss a little bit of a framework of what we're going to talk about today, okay? All of us here, everyone up here, all of you have been on a journey, a bit of a journey, okay? And we've been watching how the doctor-patient relationship has changed. This question of do no harm, the Hippocratic Oath has come into question. There's this philosophy of we know what's better for you from coming on high. That's becoming more prevalent, okay? Doctors have been joining corporate practices, okay, and getting less ability to enact that doctor-patient relationship. Patient-centric medicine in medical schools has been challenged now by this guidance or evidence-based approaches. Administrators and bureaucrats, frankly, all across society have been growing in number in these large, more centralized organizations. You know, relevant to cattle farming, food production changes have been going from local to more centralized, okay? The citizen-government relationship, as I think many of you out here know, has been changing. And even at a greater scale, we have international organizations like the WHO challenging sovereign states. So many of you are aware of the WHO. There's a pandemic treaty and international health regulations that are essentially going to be dictating how we are supposed to respond to another pandemic, should one happen. And we know that the WHO, of course, is in the thrall of multiple organizations, a giant one, the Chinese Communist Party. Of course, we also have the biopharmaceutical industrial complex and giant nonprofits that are not accountable to anybody. So this is the setup, okay? This is where we are. It's a question of sovereignty, individual, local, national. And this is a situation where ideology, it's something called Lysenkoism. Some of you may have heard this term before. Ideology takes precedence over science, and terrible things happen as a result. So let me start now with the good doctors, and we'll start with you, Dr. Miller. In all of this, as we've been watching this unfold on your journey, what is the most unusual, unexpected realization that hit you?
Well, it was actually very early on in the pandemic when all of us were on the same footing. Nobody knew how to best to treat this disease. So I, like a lot of good doctors all over the world, were searching and trying to contact other physicians, other sources to see what was working. And we found things, some repurposed drugs and therapeutics and vitamins and things. We found that they were very useful, and there was science to back them up. And when I presented them to my colleagues, they didn't want to hear about it. They only wanted to follow what the central planners told them to do. And that was a huge realization and a great disappointment to me, because I thought my profession was a cut above. And now that I see this, I am very concerned about the practice of medicine in this country and how far it has fallen between the doctor-patient relationship.
Dr. Malone, same question, please.
So for me, it's been a gradual reveal. Starting early in 2020, the big shock was the censorship. I couldn't believe that they would shut down a book that Jill and I had written about how to prepare for the pandemic that was just written for the average person. Then I saw the censorship going on in the academic literature. Then I saw all the central control all over the world pushing the same memes, the same messages, the same false narratives. And I knew that we were in a situation that had completely changed from any pandemic that I'd been involved in the past.
You know, this foundational issue of security, you know, you're in an interesting position, Dr. Miller. You are both a physician, country physician, but you also have 300 head of cattle. Okay, you're a farmer at the same time. And you're seeing, we've talked about this, you're seeing the same trend essentially happen in both areas. So tell me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been farming and ranching my entire life. And unfortunately, during that time, we have seen more and more centralized control in the cattle business. And today, we have basically a monopoly of 4 multinational corporations that control the beef industry. And there's a choke point between the producer and the packers. And they transmit high prices to the people, the consumer, and they don't pay a fair price to the cattle ranchers. So unfortunately, that's not sustainable. And today, over the last 4 decades, we've lost over 500,000 cattle ranchers, 7 million head of cattle, and we are at an all-time low since 1950 for a number of cattle in this country. And I say that's a national security crisis because we will be dependent on foreign countries for our food, just like we are for manufacturing, for medication, and energy.
That's right. Absolutely. So how is this scenario, Dr. Malone, manifesting in the medical profession?
We're now in a situation in which there's total centralized control. If you vary from the approved narrative, in many states, many nations, there are now laws being enacted that physicians that speak about their opinions, their observations, which differ from the approved narrative, they're subject to jail time and major fines, up to $200,000. This is coming through in Canada and already is enacted in France. And there was an attempt to do something similar in California. I expect we're going to see a lot more of this. So it's centralized control of messaging, of diagnostics, of patient treatment. The whole logic is built around the idea of what's best for the group, utilitarianism, as opposed to the traditional position and the fundamental aspect of the Hippocratic Oath, where the physician is focused on the patient, not on the population, not on the greater good, but on the good of the individual. And that's what's happened, is the whole thing is perverted around the idea of utilitarianism and that there should be the greatest good for the greatest number. Basically, what we have is creeping socialism throughout all of medicine.
So, you know, Dr. Miller, you know, the Hippocratic Oath, this is something I've been thinking about a lot because it's, I don't know, who here has actually looked at the Hippocratic Oath in the last while? I decided to take a look in there, and it's a kind of astonishing. Maybe, Dr. Miller, if you could remind us.
Just to give you some background, the Hippocratic Oath was first recorded between the 5th and the 3rd century BC, written by Dr. Hippocrates. And it basically established the principles for ethical standards for physicians. And it was centered around confidentiality and non-malfeasance, or do no harm. There are a couple of quotes from the Hippocratic Oath that I think are very pertinent to today that I want to read. Neither will I administer a poison to anybody when asked to do so, nor will I suggest such a course. Does that make sense? I will not give a woman a pessary to cause abortion. We will help the sick, Abstain from intentional wrongdoing and harm, especially from abusing the bodies of man and women. Whatsoever I see and hear in and outside my profession, I will never divulge. If I uphold this oath, I will gain in reputation. If I break this oath, the opposite will wait for me.
So, this is at the individual level. We're talking about, sovereignty at the individual level here, right? Let's take it to the other side, to the international level, right? If you could summarize, Dr. Malone, what is the reality of what the WHO is trying to do through these international health regulations and the pandemic treaty?
This appears to be a power grab that's ongoing right now, basically weaponizing public health to advance centralized control. And what's being proposed, even though the WHO and Tedros keep saying that this is not the case, it's been well documented, and we covered this yesterday in the ICS meeting, that the WHO is specifically modifying their charter and the international health regulations and proposing a treaty that in the United States is not being called a treaty because that would require a 2/3 Senate vote, that proposes that the WHO will be able to establish treatment norms and define a public health pandemic or health crisis for anything they wish. This could include energy, CO2 levels, gun violence, abortion, whatever it is that they want to declare. They can call that a public health emergency under the umbrella of One Health, which makes it so that everything falls under public health as an issue. And then they will have the authority to mandate what nation states shall do in response to those public health emergencies. And by agreement, if nation states concur with this or don't object, they will be subject to potential sanctions or other actions if they don't implement the actions that are proposed by the WHO. This goes all the way down to the level of WHO being able to stipulate what medical products or procedures you receive, what vaccines you take, what medicines you're allowed to take. No more of this ivermectin, no more of physicians directly interacting with patients. This is centralized medicine on a global scale. This is globalism taking control of all medicine and will dictate and mandate what you shall do and what your nation state shall do in response to whatever the WHO defines as a public health emergency.
And so how do you respond? The typical response I hear to this, Dr. Malone, is these are just guidelines.
Yeah, so that has been kind of the limited hangout position that the WHO has taken for PR purposes. What Jan is speaking to is the kind of propaganda messaging that's coming out of the WHO that these are just guidelines. But if you go through, as Philip Krauss has done, a lawyer from Switzerland that testified yesterday and will be testifying in the Senate for Ron Johnson on Monday, if you go through and actually look at the details of the document, it clearly outlines and designates that the WHO will have authority to mandate actions on the part of nation states. What they've done is they've changed some of the words instead of optional, and they're not using the word mandate, they're using some very clever legal language that is the equivalent of obligations and mandates without actually calling them that.
Well, and this has actually been a theme, I think, in almost every area of human endeavor. Words have been twisted to mean different things.
Twisted and weaponized. This is a key part of this propaganda warfare that's going on, where a variety of globalist organizations and NGOs are redefining language, weaponizing words in order to enable their control agenda.
I always love to talk about, what can we do in these kinds of situations? Because this obviously seems incredibly overwhelming. But it just struck me, thinking about you, Dr. Miller, working as a country doctor with the cattle ranch, that you actually might have some of the solution here. Maybe you can speak to that.
as far as the WHO goes?
How do we respond to these kinds of realities? Right?
Well,
yeah.
First of all, we must get involved, and we must not be afraid to stand up. For tyranny to have success, it just means a bunch of good people do nothing. If you stand up, will there be negative consequences? Absolutely. But if you don't stand up, there'll be more. And if you do stand up, there'll be many, many positive consequences. As far as the WHO goes, we must demand that our government not sign this treaty. And I would say go even further. We must leave the WHO and defund the WHO. Well, Director Tedros puts out a bunch of propaganda saying we are not prepared for the next pandemic. Well, I say, if we look at how they handled the last pandemic, they are the last people that we want to handle a future pandemic.
Well, and in the event that there's some resistance to your ideas, you know, I understand that the physician, I guess, relationship isn't actually governed at the federal level. It's governed at the state level, right? Maybe you could speak to that.
So this is a key point. The question is, what are our strategies and tactics in an environment in which the Biden administration is all in on these international health regulations? In fact, the modifications to the IHRs were written by the US HHS. Our government, the Biden administration, is the source of a lot of this new language that's being pushed that would give authority and basically overcome American sovereignty and place it in the hands of this globalist organization, the WHO. But fortunately, we have a U.S. Constitution. And the U.S. Constitution specifically states powers not allocated to the federal government vest to the states. And that explicitly includes regulation of the practice of medicine. The federal government does not have the authority to engage in an agreement with the World Health Organization that would cede authority for regulating the practice of medicine in the United States. It's unconstitutional. And what you need to do, so there's a specific, here's the specific ask from you, okay? Here's what we really need you specifically to do, is engage with your state AG, with your governor, with your legislators at the state level to alert them to what's going on and insist, particularly in red states, just as red states have gotten together to resist the border chaos that's going on right now, to insist that the red states get together and make an explicit statement that they reject this WHO treaty and they reject the authority of the federal government to regulate the practice of medicine through agreeing to these globalist WHO international health regulation modifications that will go from suggestions to mandates under this new language. Number two, we need to set up a commission to look at what has happened here in HHS and the interface with WHO under Mr. Trump when he's elected, so that we can figure out what has gone wrong with this revolving door and all of the corruption that has moved through the whole system. Number three, we need to emphasize not centralized, globalized medicine, but a decentralized approach. The ultimate decentralization is empowering the physician-patient relationship and breaking away from these large corporatist controlled situations where basically you are just a number and your physician or other health provider, nurse assistant, etc., physician assistant, is forced into a situation where they are treating you by a checklist. That's what's happening, and that's a step towards artificial intelligence-driven medicine. That's where they want to go, is standardized medicine where you're all a number and you are processed through the system, given a diagnosis, and then basically you have checklist-driven medicine. This is what's being taught in medical schools right now, together with wokeism. This is what's being pushed all the way through the system, And if you want to live in a world in which you're treated by people like Brooke that treat you as an individual, instead of being treated as just another number, you got to get with the program and make it clear that you find that unacceptable, and find physicians like Brooke to go to get your medical care from.
Final quick thought from Dr. Miller, and just like, what does it look like to have this private practice, you know, essentially solo, right?
Well, we were pretty much forced out of, we were in private care for a little while, had our own practice, and then we were sort of gobbled up by a corporation, and we were sort of forced out of it because we were more patient-centric and we weren't following the rules. And the reason we got there is because of the monstrosity of red tape and bureaucracy and the complexity it is to deal with insurance companies and Medicare and the government.
And Obamacare.
And Obamacare. Physicians are no longer wanting to do that, so they are running into the arms of corporate medicine. And that is the key. They're running into the arms of corporate medicine. They work for the corporation. They don't work for the patient. So we need to get back. We need to simplify the process. Nobody knows what anything costs. We need to simplify the process, make it a direct transaction between me and my patient, and their insurance needs to be for major disaster.
Well, folks, that's it for today. Please give them a huge hand.
Thank you, gentlemen.